Our next speaker is Heidi Whitehead. Heidi has always been intrigued by marine mammals and continues to be inspired by their behavior, adaptations, and stranding patterns. Heidi has worked with Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network for 17 years and has served as the executive director and state stranding coordinator for the nonprofit since 2005. Heidi is well-versed in the field, devoting her time to the investigation of marine mammal strandings and population research by means of rescue, rehabilitation, data collection, and necropsy. Ms. Whitehead has been recognized for her passion and commitment to marine mammal conservation through the NOAA Environmental Hero Award Program and Exemplary Service Awards from the National Marine Fisheries Service. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to move this over. Hopefully you guys can still hear me okay. Is that good for everybody? So thank you all for being here, and thanks, Chris, for having us. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network and kind of what our role is continuously. I've been asked to talk about the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network. I know I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of you in a lot of different capacities over the years in marine mammal response. So I'm going to talk about kind of our continuous role and then the role that we have taken on during spill response as well. So the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network, for those of you that are not familiar with us, we were created in 1980, primarily to further the understanding of marine mammals. So this was coming off the cusp of the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972, and there was really an interest in looking into marine mammals specifically that were stranding here along the Texas coast. So we are a nonprofit organization, so we're supported by grants and donations to be able to do the work that we do all along the coastline, as well as many different agencies that come together. The Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network holds the sole stranding agreement, so because these animals are obviously under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the way that we're able to get involved and to handle them for both live response as well as investigation is with this stranding agreement through National Marine Fisheries Service. So we're the sole stranding agreement holder for the state of Texas, and then we also work with other organizations that have been designated under that agreement, such as SeaWorld of Texas and the Texas State Aquarium as well. So we couldn't do it without these partners. SeaWorld of Texas, with them being located in San Antonio, it's a little bit difficult for them to obviously be on the beaches all the time, but we do make use of their expertise for veterinary resources, as well as times of entanglement captures that need to be completed, or animals that are really under distress and it requires capture. So we make use of their expertise in that way. Texas State Aquarium, we also work with closely. They're located down in Corpus Christi. We have a large coastline, and they have a sea lab facility there that we're able to make use of for rehabilitation. So we also, like I said, collaborate with a number of different agencies, state, federal, city, you name it. We have a big coastline, and so we need all the help that we can get in many different ways, whether it be resources, carcass removal. All of those things are very important to us in the course of our work. We have a team of very specialized volunteers. So we have some volunteers that are with us that have been with us for 20, 25 years working. So they become very highly trained, specialized. We have a critical care team that actually works with live animal response, and then we have those that have been trained for more advanced necropsy sampling techniques, as we have limited staff due to limited funding, of course. So we have only a few paid staff members for the whole state of Texas. So some of our primary objectives, obviously on a consistent basis, is to respond to marine mammal strandings. When they strand alive, we aim to provide care to them, whether that be making the decision for euthanasia or to bring them into rehabilitation if they are a good rehab candidate. We also aim to collect biological samples from animals that are watching and dead on the beaches, and that is really primarily what we do. We may get the occasional live animal, less than 10% stranded alive along our coastline, but we respond to an average of about 125 to 150 marine mammal strandings on the coast every year, and the majority of those are dead. So what's really important for us, we've talked a lot about baseline data today. So being in existence since 1980, we have a very large data set And we try to maintain that long-term data set for baseline values so that it can be used in comparison to other areas. And we'll go into that a little bit further. We also conduct photo ID surveys. So we are trying to get a better idea of populations and their movements. So we spend a lot of time developing a catalog for Texas. And we're also out there assessing both dead and live animals for human impact. So what is the incidence or occurrence of human impact, entanglements, and what are we seeing as far as harassment from just recreational boaters and fishermen as far as illegal feeding and those types of things. And then obviously it's very important that we collaborate with researchers all over the United States that are looking to advance science with marine mammals. We have a very large number of animals coming in, so we're able to accommodate a lot of researchers when it comes to samples. So how do we cover such a big coastline? So we have designated regions within the state, as you can see here, each given a designated name, and then animals that strand within those colored regions are assigned a field ID according to that regional area. Within each of those regions, we have a Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network regional coordinator, and they are set up with a cache of equipment, stranding response vehicle, and also a team of responders that is actually there within the region, ready to go at a moment's notice. And that's for both dead animals and live animals so that we can have a faster response for animals given the large nature of the area we have. We do have a centralized hotline that's been in place since our existence. So it has quite a wide reach. Most folks are familiar with this 1-800-9MAMMAL number. And it really goes to somebody that's a staff member that's here in Galveston, and then we can dispatch to those regional coordinators as necessary. So Galveston is our primary kind of state office, if you will, where the majority of our strandings actually occur, as well as where our offices and primary facilities are located. We also have in Corpus Christi, like I mentioned, the Texas State Aquarium, where we are able to make use of the Sea Lab facility there and work with them primarily on live rehabilitations. Also down in South Padre Island near Brownsville there, we work with UTRGV, the Coastal Studies Lab, and we have a stabilization center there where animals can be taken for a short period of time that are alive to be transferred to so that we can stabilize them before they have to undergo a long transport, say to Corpus Christi for rehabilitation. So our primary center is located right here in Galveston, like I mentioned. We're set up for rehabilitation of multiple animals. So I'm working closely with Liz and looking through kind of what our response capabilities are in times of spill if we have live oiled animals that need to come in, working to make sure that we have the necessary setup so that we can be the primary facility for where animals will be brought here on the Texas coast. We also have a dedicated necropsy lab, and that is where we spend most of our time. Like I said, the majority of our animals are dead animals coming in, and we do extensive necropsies on them. The earlier code animals are brought into the lab for necropsies like you see here, and that's where we do the full suite of sampling, extensive sampling, including histopathology. And then some of the other later code strandings are actually recovered on the beach, and that's where a lot of the state, city, county employees come into play. It's very important for us to be able to open up the carcasses on the beach and to collect as many samples as we can, but we also want to make sure that the health of the public is a consideration. And so we work really closely with those agencies to be able to bury them in collaboration with us so that we can make sure we get our data, but then also the animals are being buried. We used to bury all of these animals by hand for many, many years. I'm a certified grave digger, I think, but it's been really nice to have those resources available for us to be able to move along a little faster in our investigation of strandings as they're coming in. So what is our role when we're responding to a spill? I thought it'd be good to just bring it a little bit closer to home, kind of see what examples of what our role was in Texas citywide spill. We'll talk a little bit about DWH and our contribution there, but as you all know, Texas citywide spill was here in our backyard originally. That's where it originated there, Houston Ship Channel. back in March of 2014. Large amount of bunker fuel oil was distributed, and so it really didn't affect just that area though. As you all know, if you were involved, that it went out along the coastline and as far down south as Padre Island National Seashore. So there were efforts for marine mammals that far south, and we've got a lot of remote areas in there. So there were some logistical challenges when it came to, especially the Matagorda Peninsula and those areas where ATVs had to be boated for surveying for marine mammals. So there was a lot involved in that, and I'm sure those of you that were involved remember that quite vividly. So when the TCY spill happened, we were notified by Parks and Wildlife. I think Andy was the one that gave me the first call there. And immediately I got in contact with NOAA, and we began looking at what was going to be our initial phases for assessment. So aerial surveys, we were looking at getting stranding network observers on board because the ship channel was closed to determine whether there were any dolphins in the oiled area. This area where the spill occurred, there's usually a dense population of dolphins there. So it was important for us to determine whether there were dolphins in immediate danger there as far as the oil was concerned. We also worked with area researchers such as Environmental Institute of Houston and Texas A&M researchers that hold permits to be working on the boat around dolphins. They do photo ID, and so it was important to kind of stay in communication with them about whether they were seeing animals and whether they were seeing their typical dolphins in the areas where they were. We also worked with land-based surveys, so that's also with Texas A&M University. They had a data set already established from a year prior during that exact same season, where they were able to actually view animals from their location there at the campus in the ship channel, and then that data was actually used right after the oil spill to determine whether animals were there in the area of the spill or not. So there was some interesting data that came from that. Also, in addition to just looking for animals that were in the early phases around the area of the oil, then we really worked hard with land-based surveys to look for strandings that were occurring. So we had SCAT teams that we were working with, as well as a number of local agencies, Park Board, those people that were on the beach looking for these animals and strandings that were coming ashore. That's where the spill event volunteers really came into play as well through the ICS. If they didn't have specific marine mammal stranding response experience, they could still be on the beach looking for those animals. And so that was really helpful to our response team, not having to be the boots on the ground everywhere looking for dolphins, but they were notifying us, seems like every few minutes of where a dolphin was located so that we could get out there to them. So we were looped into the incident command system fairly early. I was able to get out as a representative of the wildlife branch for marine mammals, and then within a very short period of time, less than 24 hours, a NOAA representative was here from Florida. I think that was Liz. Did you come first? And then she was thrown into the fire there, and I was relieved for response. So we got busy on response, and then, like she mentioned, there was a lot involved over operations as well there. So trying to make sure we had everything we needed in place here at our facility for response, both for live animals and dead dolphins. Like I mentioned, we have our centralized reporting hotline, but the wildlife hotline was established with the branch. So that was something that went out through media. It was going out to the public of where to report any wildlife that came on the beaches. And so it really worked seamlessly for us to be able to receive reports directly from the wildlife branch. They were trained in taking those reports and collecting location data and GPS coordinates, and so that made it a lot easier for us to be able to find these animals that SCAT teams and others were reporting. One thing we did find is that it was very helpful to have responders that were familiar with the area. So we had some NOAA responders that had come in to assist us from out of state, but it was difficult for them to find locations of animals. So we had to kind of do a switch and have them doing a lot of the work back at our facility and us doing a lot of the in the field response work, because a lot of these animals were found in very remote places, scat teams were crawling in rocks and finding animals in nooks and crannies where you wouldn't think they might be found. So that was a lesson learned. So response, our involvement was really to be available to care for any live oiled marine mammals, so whether that meant capture or stranded marine mammals that were coming in oiled, and again, they would be brought to our primary facility here in Galveston with Texas State Aquarium as a backup as they were located further south on the coast as the oil moved down. This requires experienced marine mammal handlers, so we want people that are already experienced with working with dolphins, and then also they had to have this HAZWOPER certification in place. So thankfully, we had just completed our HAZWOPER recertification, and so we were able to get out on site immediately. So we didn't have any snags there as far as our crews were concerned, and that's something that we try to keep updated so that is the case with any events that come up. We also have a dedicated marine mammal veterinarian that can attend to these animals as they come in, and that rolled over into the dead stranded animals as well, because we want to have a veterinarian there to help us with necropsies if possible, or at least someone that is highly trained in advanced necropsy sampling techniques. So a lot of our work beyond necropsying and sampling these dead stranded marine mammals was actually the chain of custody requirements that go with it. So anybody that's worked in chain of custody, you know that it's extremely time consuming, it's tedious work. So we maintained all of the carcasses here in locked freezers, sample preservation, as well as photos and data records that all had to be kept under very strict guidelines and COC requirements. And again, HAZWOPER teams had to be in place, and we keep those teams in place for these types of events. So post-event, we talked a little bit about NERDA sampling. So even though we maintained a heightened sampling protocol during the event itself, both fortunately and unfortunately, the Northern Gulf UME had just occurred, and so we were working off of this Northern Gulf UME protocol for our sampling techniques. So it's quite heightened, but it made it consistent for us to be able to be collecting data and samples exactly as those in the Northern Gulf were collecting samples after the DWH spill. After the event ended, we had a step-down sampling protocol, which was still what I would consider a heightened protocol. It wasn't a whole lot of stepping down there, but we maintained that for a number of months following the stranding event, and then continued to monitor, and we still maintain a heightened stranding protocol ever since this event, even now when we're responding to strandings. And some of that means that if you have a late code decomp animal, you're still going to be taking samples like it were an earlier code. Sample analysis, this was the time period when we would look to prioritize cases, so we'd work with the NOAA team. They would let us know what cases were prioritized based on either stranding location, whether they were visibly oiled, non-visibly oiled, and necropsy observations to prioritize those to ship for analysis once funding was secured. And then obviously looking at our historical data. So that was really important, especially because TCY overlapped with our usually heightened stranding season that occurs during that January to March period. So it was really good for us to have these historical numbers of animals that usually land on our beaches during certain times, to be able to tease that out, kind of what animals may have specifically been affected by TCY, and also considering which animals may have been found just due to the fact that we had heightened surveys happening as well. So those are all things that we did a very thorough review of the data there. So then moving on from the Texas citywide spill, even though we were not part of this Northern Gulf bottlenose dolphin UME that occurred after the Deepwater Horizon spill, we did contribute to a lot of the research that came out of that. And the reason I'm pointing this out is, again, going back to a lot of the baseline data. So that is where our role came in a lot of ways here, is looking at, say, paraffin blocks, where we were able to submit those. They were looking at the histo, and then they could use those as comparisons, say for the lung study and the adrenal gland study, a lot of our animals became like those base comparison animals for the rest of the Northern Gulf. So again, I point to the fact that it's very important for us to keep up this stranding work and continue to maintain that data set. And then again, we want to continue monitoring the population. So even though we may not be looped into a certain event as a die-off, it's still important for us to continue to monitor those animals, because there may not be certain borders that they don't cross. And so we want to make sure that we're catching any health trends that may be occurring. Like was brought out, we may see effects 40 years down the road. And so these are some things that we want to make sure that we're staying on top of. So what are some of the other research that we've been involved in? We've been working on updating abundance estimates for bottlenose dolphins in Texas coastal and inshore waters, as well as developing a photo ID catalog for Texas waters. And we've been able to include a lot of the historical images. We've been able to digitize those that Texas A&M University has provided us on a lot of the photo ID work that they've done over the years. And the reason that it's important for us to develop these updated abundance estimates is because the last abundance estimates that were completed in Texas were in the 90s with aerial line transect surveys. And so they're more than 8 years old. They're out of date really for management purposes. And so it's really important for us to get a better handle on how many animals and what the populations are doing in our Texas bays and waters. So this is continuing on that effort. We have been working since 2014 as a collaborative effort with NOAA Fisheries and also Texas A&M University on completing these photo ID surveys. We have systematically been working through all of these Texas bays that you see here listed and have completed mark recapture surveys in all of these bays to date, and we'll be moving on to some of the other bays as well in Texas. We're also looking at distribution patterns, movements, life history, habitat use. We get so much information beyond just developing a catalog of these animals. And this information can be used for management purposes. So it's going to be very important for us to better understand the impacts to the populations if we know how many are there and also kind of what their habitat use is in the area. And these are some recent publications and presentations that have come out of that work just in the last couple of years. A couple of these are pending review, but I'm happy to share these with you after the talk as well. So Laura talked about restoration and how we restore marine mammals through mitigation of interaction with fishing gear, identifying impacts from noise, reducing illegal feeding, and then also increasing our understanding of marine mammal illness and death. And so the Stranding Network's role in all of these things is important, but it's going to require enhanced capacity for stranding response organizations. So we really can make a lot of advancement in our marine mammal knowledge, but we need increased capacity within the Stranding Network as well. We also are looking to work with independent researchers. Hopefully many of you have some research ideas you would like to bring to the table and have done so for many years. So we really can make advancement in that regard as well. And then make use of our education programs. So we come in contact again with our human interaction assessments of all carcasses and live animals. We're able to collect data on recreational fisheries interactions as well as illegal feeding. Any of that gear that we collect is sent to a gear repository within NOAA, where then they produce a report on that specific gear. And so all of that goes back into the conservation of these animals. So in summary, Stranding Networks play an important role in marine mammal response. We've talked a lot about stranding response and kind of how that fits in with these oil spill responses. But data collection and research is really important to continue for this baseline data so that we can protect these populations for years to come, hopefully increase survival of these live stranded animals that are coming in. We're learning a lot as time goes on about rehabilitation specifically, but then also monitoring for any health trends or emerging diseases, and then conducting these population assessments as well when we can. I think that's all I have.